Sarah walked into Anyhow restaurant with her usual confidence, her designer heels clicking against the worn linoleum floor. The smell of grease and stale cigarettes hit her immediately, making her wrinkle her nose in disgust. This was definitely not the kind of place she would normally choose for dinner, but circumstances had left her with little choice. The restaurant looked exactly like its name suggested, thrown together anyhow, without much thought or care. Mismatched tables and chairs filled the cramped space, while flickering fluorescent lights cast an unforgiving glow over everything. The walls were decorated with faded photographs of food that looked nothing like what was actually being served. Sarah had been driving for hours, trying to get to her important business meeting in the next city. Her usual route had been blocked by a massive traffic accident, forcing her to take unfamiliar back roads. When her car started making strange noises and finally broke down completely, she found herself stranded in this small town that seemed forgotten by time. The mechanic at the only garage in town had given her the bad news. Her car would need at least 2 days to repair, maybe 3. The part had to be ordered from the city, and with the weekend coming up, nothing would happen quickly. Sarah had no choice but to find a place to stay and something to eat while she figured out how to handle this disaster. The motel across the street was the only accommodation available, and it looked even worse than the restaurant. At least here, she could get some food and maybe use the Wi-Fi to reschedule her important meetings. Her phone had been showing only 1 bar of signal since she arrived in this dead-end town. As Sarah looked around the restaurant, she noticed the other customers. They were mostly locals, dressed in work clothes and speaking in the slow, measured way that small-town people often do. Their conversations stopped when they noticed her, taking in her expensive business suit, perfectly styled hair, and obvious frustration with her situation. The waitress who approached her table looked to be in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and kind eyes that had seen plenty of life. Her name tag read Betty, and she carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing this job for many years. "What can I get you, honey?" Betty asked with a warm smile that seemed genuine, despite the less-than-glamorous surroundings. Sarah glanced at the plastic-covered menu, noting the basic offerings and surprisingly low prices. Everything seemed to be variations of comfort food: burgers, fried chicken, meatloaf, and pie. Nothing like the sophisticated cuisine she was used to in the city restaurants where she normally conducted business. "I'll take the grilled chicken." "Salad," Sarah said, hoping it would be the safest option. "And coffee, please. Strong coffee." Betty nodded and headed toward the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her growing anxiety about the disaster this trip had become. She pulled out her phone and tried calling her assistant, but the call kept dropping. Her important presentation was supposed to happen tomorrow morning, and she was stuck in the middle of nowhere with no reliable transportation. As she waited for her food, Sarah noticed more about the restaurant and its customers. Despite its shabby appearance, the place had a warm, community feel that was completely different from the cold efficiency of the city establishments she knew. People seemed to know each other, calling out greetings and asking about family members by name. An elderly man at the corner table was celebrating his birthday, and without any prompting, the entire restaurant began singing "Happy Birthday," while Betty brought out a simple chocolate cake with candles. The genuine joy and spontaneous celebration struck Sarah as both foreign and oddly touching. When her salad arrived, Sarah was surprised to find it was actually quite good. The chicken was perfectly grilled, the vegetables were fresh, and the homemade dressing had a flavor that put many upscale restaurants to shame. She found herself eating with more enthusiasm than she had expected, realizing she had not had a proper meal all day. Betty returned to check on her, refilling her coffee cup without being asked. "You're not from around here?" she observed with a friendly smile. "Car trouble?" Sarah nodded, explaining her situation. Betty listened with the kind of patient attention that Sarah rarely experienced in her fast-paced business world. When Sarah expressed her frustration about missing her important meeting, Betty offered practical suggestions and even volunteered to call around to see if anyone might be driving to the city the next day. "Don't you worry, honey," Betty said, with reassuring confidence. "Small towns like this, we take care of each other. We'll figure something out for you." Sarah felt a strange mixture of gratitude and skepticism. In her experience, people always had angles, always wanted something in return for their help. But Betty's offer seemed to come from genuine kindness, without any expectation of reward. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself relaxing slightly, despite her circumstances. The restaurant's atmosphere was growing on her, and she began to observe the interactions around her with professional curiosity rather than pure disdain. There was clearly more to this place and these people than met the eye. What Sarah did not realize was that her own presence in the restaurant was creating quite a stir among the locals. Her expensive clothes, her obvious wealth, and her initially dismissive attitude had not gone unnoticed. Some of the customers recognized the type: city people who looked down on small-town life and the people who chose to live it. But there was something else they could not have known, something that would make Sarah's brief stay in their town far more significant than anyone could have imagined. Hidden beneath her polished exterior and business success was a story that connected her to this very place in ways that would shock everyone, including Sarah herself. As she finished her surprisingly satisfying meal and prepared to head to the motel for what she expected to be a sleepless night of worry, Sarah had no idea that her forced stop in this forgotten town would change everything she thought she knew about herself and her past. The next morning, Sarah woke up in the motel room feeling stiff and unrested. The thin mattress and unfamiliar sounds of the small town had made sleep difficult. She checked her phone immediately, hoping for better signal, but found only a handful of messages that had managed to come through overnight. Her assistant had rescheduled the morning meeting, but the afternoon presentation with the investors was too important to postpone. Sarah dressed quickly in a fresh business suit from her travel bag and walked back to Anyhow Restaurant, hoping their coffee was stronger than their Wi-Fi signal appeared to be. The morning crowd was different from the dinner customers, farmers and early shift workers grabbing quick breakfasts before starting their day. Betty was behind the counter, looking as fresh and energetic as she had the night before. She smiled when she saw Sarah enter. "Morning, honey. How did you sleep?" "Not great," Sarah admitted, sliding into the same booth she had occupied the evening before. "Any luck with finding someone heading to the city today?" Betty poured her coffee without being asked, the simple gesture somehow making Sarah feel more welcome than she expected. "Actually, yes. Tom Morrison usually drives to the city on Wednesdays to pick up supplies for his hardware store. He might be able to take you, but he won't be leaving until this afternoon." Sarah felt her stress level spike again. The afternoon departure would mean missing both meetings, potentially costing her company a $1 million contract. She tried calling her assistant again, but the call failed to connect properly, leaving her feeling more isolated than ever. "Let me get you some breakfast," Betty suggested. "The stress eating won't help anything, but good food might give you the energy to figure this out." While Betty prepared her order, Sarah noticed a conversation at a nearby table. Two women were discussing someone named Elena Martinez, speaking in hushed, respectful tones about her recent success and how proud the whole town was of her achievements. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the way they spoke suggested this Elena was someone special to the community. "She grew up right here in town," one woman was saying. "Hard to believe she's now running that big company in the city. Never forgot where she came from, though. Still sends money to help fix up the school playground." Sarah found herself listening despite her own problems. Success stories always interested her, especially when they involved someone rising from humble beginnings to corporate leadership. It was a path she understood well, having climbed her own way up from a difficult childhood to her current position as a senior executive. Betty returned with a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast that looked and smelled much better than Sarah had expected from such a simple place. "Eat up," she encouraged. "You'll think clearer on a full stomach." As Sarah ate, she found herself asking about Elena Martinez, partly out of professional curiosity and partly to distract herself from her current predicament. Betty's face lit up with obvious pride when the subject came up. "Elena's one of our success stories," Betty explained, refilling Sarah's coffee cup. "Sweet girl, grew up in a tough situation but never let it stop her. She worked here actually, right in this restaurant, all through high school, saved every penny she made for college." Sarah felt an unexpected connection to this story. Her own teenage years had been spent working in restaurants and retail stores, saving money for her education while dealing with a chaotic home life. The parallel was striking, though she had never thought to maintain connections with the places where she had worked during those difficult years. "What kind of company does she run now?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "Some big marketing firm," Betty replied. "She handles campaigns for major corporations, helps them reach new customers. Way above my head, but she explained it once when she visited last Christmas. Makes it sound simple even though I know it must be incredibly complicated." Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. Marketing campaigns for major corporations was exactly her field. In fact, her company specialized in precisely that kind of work. The business world was smaller than most people realized, especially at the executive level. There was a good chance she had either worked with or against this Elena Martinez at some point. "Do you remember the name of her company?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite her growing interest. Betty thought for a moment. "Something with Apex in the name, I think. Apex Marketing Solutions, maybe? She left some business cards last time she visited, but that was months ago." Sarah's heart stopped. Apex Marketing Solutions was not just any company, it was her biggest competitor. They had been fighting for the same contracts for years, often coming down to final presentations where one small advantage could make the difference between success and failure. Elena Martinez was not just some small-town success story. She was Sarah's professional rival. More shocking still, Elena Martinez was scheduled to make her own presentation to the same investors Sarah was supposed to meet with this afternoon. The competition Sarah had been preparing for weeks to win was against the same person this small town considered their local hero. The irony was almost overwhelming. Here Sarah was, stranded in Elena's hometown, eating at the restaurant where her competitor had once worked, being cared for by people who clearly adored Elena and had no idea that Sarah represented everything Elena was fighting against in the business world. Betty continued talking about Elena's kindness and generosity, completely unaware of the bomb she had just dropped. Sarah tried to maintain her composure while her mind raced through the implications. Should she tell Betty who she was? Should she try to gather intelligence about Elena's background that might give her an advantage? Should she find a way to get to the city immediately to salvage her presentation? "She never acts like she's better than anyone," Betty was saying. "Even with all her success, she still sits right here in this same booth when she visits, orders the same meatloaf dinner. She loved as a teenager and asks about everyone by name. Real class act." Sarah felt a mixture of admiration and frustration. It was one thing to compete against Elena Martinez in the sterile environment of corporate conference rooms, but quite another to be surrounded by evidence of her genuine character and community connections. This personal insight into her competitor was both valuable and unsettling. As the morning progressed, Sarah realized she was facing a decision that went beyond just getting to her business meeting. She could use her knowledge of Elena's background to her advantage, or she could respect the privacy and trust that Betty and the other townspeople had shown her. The choice would reveal something important about her own character, something she was not entirely sure she was ready to confront. Sarah spent the rest of the morning walking around the small town, her mind churning with everything she had learned. The place was exactly what she expected, A main street with old buildings, a few local shops, and the kind of quiet atmosphere that made city people feel restless. But now she saw it differently, knowing that her biggest professional rival had grown up here. She found herself standing outside the old brick high school, imagining a young Elena Martinez walking these same sidewalks, probably dreaming of bigger things while working at Anyhow restaurant to save money for college. The image was both inspiring and threatening, depending on how Sarah chose to look at it. Her phone finally managed to connect to a stronger signal, and the messages came flooding in. Her assistant had been trying to reach her all morning with updates about the presentation. The investors had agreed to a video conference call at 4 o'clock, which meant Sarah still had a chance to compete for the contract if she could find reliable internet and a professional-looking background. But there was more news that made her stomach drop. Elena Martinez had requested to move her presentation earlier in the day, claiming a scheduling conflict. If approved, Elena would present first, giving her a significant advantage in setting the tone and expectations for the investors. Sarah immediately called her assistant back, pacing in front of the town's small post office while trying to figure out her options. The video call was possible, but the internet connection in this town was questionable at best. The motel's Wi-Fi had barely worked for checking email, and she could not risk her presentation cutting out in the middle of her pitch. "Find out everything you can about Elena Martinez," Sarah instructed her assistant. "I need to know her presentation style, her typical strategies, anything that might give us an edge." As she hung up, Sarah realized she was standing next to an old woman who had been listening to her conversation with obvious interest. The woman was probably in her 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You're the young lady staying at the motel?" the woman said. It was not a question. "Having car trouble, I heard." Sarah nodded, wondering how quickly news traveled in a town this size. Apparently, her presence had been noted and discussed by more people than she realized. "I'm Margaret Henderson," the woman continued. "I run the library here, and I couldn't help overhearing your phone call. You mentioned Elena Martinez." Sarah felt her guard go up immediately. "Yes, she's a business associate." Margaret's expression suggested she was not buying the casual explanation. "Elena's a special girl. We're all very proud of what she's accomplished. I hope your business with her is the friendly kind." There was something in Margaret's tone that made Sarah uncomfortable. The older woman clearly cared deeply about Elena and was protective of her reputation. Sarah found herself caught between professional necessity and an unexpected feeling of guilt about her competitive intentions. "It's just business," Sarah said carefully. "Nothing personal." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "In my experience, young lady, business is always personal when it involves people we care about. Elena means a lot to this community. She's never forgotten where she came from, and we don't forget the people who matter to us." The conversation felt like a warning, though Margaret's tone remained polite. Sarah excused herself and walked back toward the restaurant, feeling increasingly complicated about her situation. She was used to corporate competition where personal backgrounds and hometown loyalties did not factor into business decisions. This felt different and more uncomfortable. When she returned to Anyhow restaurant for lunch, Betty greeted her with news about the ride to the city. Tom Morrison had agreed to take her, but he could not leave until 3 o'clock, which would get her to the city just in time for the video conference if nothing went wrong along the way. Sarah accepted the arrangement gratefully, then found herself asking more questions about Elena Martinez. She told herself it was professional research, but her curiosity felt increasingly personal as Betty shared more stories about Elena's character and work ethic. "She used to study right here in this booth," Betty explained, pointing to where Sarah was sitting. "Every night after her shift, she'd spread out her homework and work until closing time. Never complained, never acted like the work was beneath her. She understood that every job teaches you something if you pay attention." Sarah remembered her own teenage years working in restaurants. But her memories were colored by resentment and embarrassment about the circumstances that forced her to work. She had viewed those jobs as temporary necessities, not learning experiences. To be grateful for. What was her family situation like? Sarah asked, genuinely curious now rather than just gathering intelligence. Betty's expression grew more serious. Elena's mother worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after her father left. Elena took care of her younger brother while her mother was working, helped him with homework, made sure he stayed out of trouble. She could have focused only on herself, but she always put family first. This information hit Sarah unexpectedly hard. Her own childhood had been marked by a father who left and a mother who struggled, but Sarah had responded by becoming fiercely independent and focused entirely on her own advancement. She had not maintained close family relationships, viewing them as potential distractions from her career goals. As Betty continued talking, Sarah realized she was learning about a version of success that looked very different from her own path. Elena had apparently managed to achieve professional excellence while maintaining strong personal connections and community ties. It was a balance Sarah had never even attempted to strike. The afternoon was approaching quickly, and Sarah knew she needed to prepare for the most important presentation of her career. But instead of feeling confident and focused, she found herself questioning assumptions she had held for years about what success really meant and what prices were worth paying to achieve it. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. Elena Martinez had been approved for the earlier presentation time, and initial reports suggested she had made an excellent impression on the investors. Sarah would now be presenting to an audience that had already heard a compelling pitch from her competitor. Sitting in the same booth where Elena had once studied as a teenager, Sarah realized this competition had become about much more than a business contract. It had become a confrontation with different philosophies about success, community, and the relationships that matter most in life. Tom Morrison turned out to be exactly what Sarah expected from a small-town hardware store owner: reliable, practical, and completely unimpressed by her obvious wealth and status. His pickup truck was clean but well-used, with the back loaded with supplies he had picked up from various vendors throughout the region. "Betty tells me you're in some kind of business competition," Tom said as they pulled out of town. "Must be pretty important to have you so worked up." Sarah had spent the last hour at the restaurant frantically preparing for her presentation, trying to anticipate how Elena's earlier pitch might have positioned the discussion. Her notes were scattered across the booth table, and her stress level was visible to anyone paying attention. "It's a significant contract," Sarah replied, not wanting to get into details with a stranger. "My company has been working toward this opportunity for months." Tom nodded thoughtfully as he navigated the winding country roads toward the highway. "Elena Martinez mentioned something similar when she was here last Christmas, said she was going after some big client that could change everything for her business." Sarah's attention sharpened immediately. "Elena discussed her business plans when she visited?" "Not in detail," Tom clarified, "but she seemed excited about some opportunity coming up this year. Said it would let her expand her company and hire more people. She's always thinking about how to create more jobs, Elena is. Knows how hard it can be for young people to find good work in places like our town." This casual revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Elena was not just competing for the same contract. She was planning to use it as a foundation for expansion that would benefit her hometown community. Sarah's own plans for the contract revenue involved personal bonuses and maybe some new office space in a trendy part of the city. "She's very committed to this area," Sarah observed, fishing for more information. "Always has been," Tom agreed. Even when she was in high school, Elena talked about finding ways to bring opportunities back. To small towns like ours, most kids that age just want to get out and never look back. Elena wanted to get out, succeed, and then figure out how to help everyone else. The drive continued with Tom sharing more stories about Elena's character and community involvement. Each anecdote made Sarah more uncomfortable about her competitive intentions. She had always prided herself on being tough and focused in business, but this felt different. Elena was not just another corporate rival. She was someone genuinely trying to make a positive difference. As they reached the city limits, Sarah's phone started buzzing with messages from her assistant. Elena's presentation had gone extremely well, according to early reports. The investors were impressed not just with her marketing strategies, but with her long-term vision for sustainable business growth that would benefit multiple communities. Sarah felt her confidence evaporating. Her own presentation focused on aggressive expansion and maximum profit margins. It was the approach that had made her successful throughout her career, but it suddenly seemed hollow compared to Elena's broader vision. Tom dropped her off at her office building with 30 minutes to spare before the video conference. Sarah's assistant met her at the elevator with a full briefing on Elena's presentation and the investors' reactions. She talked about creating a network of satellite offices in small towns. Her assistant explained as they walked to the conference room. The investors loved the idea of tapping into overlooked markets while supporting local economies. She positioned it as both profitable and socially responsible. Sarah reviewed her own presentation materials, realizing they would sound purely mercenary in comparison. Everything she had prepared emphasized efficiency, cost-cutting, and maximum returns. There was nothing about community impact or social responsibility. What else did she say? Sarah asked, though she was not sure she wanted to hear more. She talked about her own background, growing up in a small town and understanding those markets from personal experience. The investors seemed very impressed with her authenticity and genuine connection to the communities she wants to serve. Sarah sat down at the conference table, staring at her laptop screen while her mind raced. She could deliver her planned presentation and hope that pure business logic would win over social consciousness, or she could try to adapt her approach to match Elena's themes, though that would risk looking like an obvious copy. But there was a third option that Sarah had not considered until this moment. She could be completely honest about what she had learned over the past 2 days and how it had changed her perspective on business success. The video conference call connected, and Sarah found herself looking at the faces of 3 investors she had been trying to impress for months. They looked polite, but slightly tired, the expression of people who had already heard one excellent presentation and were not expecting the second one to measure up. "Good afternoon, Sarah," the lead investor said. "We're looking forward to hearing your proposal. I have to say, Ms. Martinez set a very high bar with her presentation this morning." Sarah took a deep breath, her finger hovering over the first slide of her prepared presentation. In that moment, she thought about Elena studying in that restaurant booth, working multiple jobs to support her family, and never losing sight of her desire to help her community. She thought about Betty's kindness to a stranded stranger, Tom's willingness to help someone he barely knew, and Margaret's protective loyalty to someone she cared about. "Before I begin," Sarah heard herself saying, "I need to tell you about something that happened to me over the past 2 days that has completely changed how I think about this project." Her assistant looked panicked, probably wondering if Sarah was about to sabotage their carefully planned strategy. But Sarah had made her decision. She was going to tell the truth about her experience in Elena's hometown, about learning what real community commitment looked like, and about realizing that business success without social impact was ultimately empty. She had no idea how the investors would react, but for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was about to do something genuinely authentic rather than just strategically smart. Whether it would cost her the contract or not, she was finally ready to compete on terms that went beyond pure profit margins. The presentation that followed would be unlike anything Sarah had ever delivered before, and regardless of the outcome, she knew it would mark a turning point in both her career and her understanding of what success really meant. Sarah's presentation took a completely different direction than anyone expected. Instead of launching into her prepared slides about profit margins and market penetration, she began by describing her experience of being stranded in a small town and discovering the community where her competitor had grown up. I spent 2 days in a place that taught me something I had never understood about business, Sarah told the investors. I met people who knew Elena Martinez when she was a teenager, working in their local restaurant, saving money for college while taking care of her family. I learned about her commitment to her community and her vision for bringing opportunities to places that are often overlooked. The investors listened with growing interest as Sarah described her conversations with Betty, Tom, and the other townspeople. She talked about witnessing genuine community spirit and understanding how Elena's background had shaped her approach to business in ways that pure corporate training never could. What I realized, Sarah continued, is that Elena and I are offering you two completely different philosophies of business success. She sees growth as an opportunity to lift entire communities. I have always seen it as a way to maximize individual achievement and company profits. Sarah's assistant looked increasingly worried, probably calculating how much damage this honest approach might do to their chances. But Sarah pressed on, feeling more authentic than she had in years of corporate presentations. My original proposal focused on aggressive expansion in major markets, cost optimization, and maximum returns on investment. Those are valid business goals, and my track record shows I can deliver them. But after seeing what Elena has accomplished and how she thinks about business responsibility, I realize my approach is missing something crucial. Sarah clicked to a new slide she had hastily created during the drive to the city. Instead of her usual charts and graphs, it showed a simple question. What if business success was measured not just by profits, but by positive impact? I am not asking you to choose my proposal over Elena's, Sarah said, surprising everyone, including herself. Her vision is clearly aligned with values that matter beyond the bottom line. But I am asking for the opportunity to learn from her example and to find ways our companies might complement each other rather than just compete. The lead investor leaned forward, clearly intrigued by this unexpected turn. Are you suggesting some kind of collaboration rather than competition? Sarah had not planned to suggest anything of the sort, but the idea felt right as soon as it was spoken. Elena understands small-town markets and community building in ways I never could. My company has resources and urban market experience. That might help her scale her vision more quickly. Instead of fighting over this contract, maybe we should be exploring how to work together. The silence that followed felt both terrifying and liberating. Sarah had just abandoned years of competitive strategy in favor of an approach she had never considered before. Her career could be over if this gamble failed, but continuing on her previous path suddenly seemed like a much worse option. This is highly unusual, one of the investors said carefully. We were expecting competing proposals, not a suggestion for partnership. Sarah nodded. I understand it is not what you planned for, but sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected directions. Elena has something my company lacks: authentic community connection and a genuine desire to create positive change. I have resources and experience she might find useful. Together, we might be able to deliver more value than either of us could alone. The presentation continued with Sarah outlining how such a collaboration might work. She proposed that Elena's company take the lead on community engagement and small-town market development, while her own firm would handle the technical infrastructure and urban market integration. The investors would get the benefit of both approaches rather than having to choose between them. When the video call ended, Sarah felt emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. She had no idea whether her unconventional approach would succeed, but she knew she had finally presented something she genuinely believed in rather than just strategically calculated. Her assistant waited until they were alone before expressing her concerns. Sarah, I have never seen you take a risk like that. What if Elena is not interested in collaboration? What if the investors think you are not competitive enough for their needs? Sarah considered these valid worries while packing up her materials. Then I will have learned something important about myself and about what I actually want from my career. I have been so focused on winning competitions that I forgot to ask whether the competitions were worth winning. Over the next few hours, Sarah found herself thinking constantly about the people she had met in Elena's hometown. Their kindness to a stranger, their loyalty to someone they cared about, and their genuine community spirit had shown her a way of living and working that she had never seriously considered. That evening, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of returning to her apartment to wait for the investor's decision, she drove back to the small town where her car was being repaired. She wanted to have dinner at Anyhow Restaurant again, to thank Betty and Tom for their help, and to process what had happened during one of the most unusual days of her professional life. When she walked into the restaurant, Betty's face lit up, with genuine pleasure at seeing her again. "How did your important meeting go, honey?" Sarah found herself smiling as she settled into what had become her usual booth. "It went very differently than I expected. I think that might turn out to be a good thing." As Betty poured her coffee and took her dinner order, Sarah realized she was looking forward to explaining her decision to people who would understand it not as a business strategy, but as a choice about the kind of person she wanted to be. For the first time in years, that felt like the most important consideration of all. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself sitting in the same booth at Anyhow Restaurant, but this time she was not alone. Across from her sat Elena Martinez, the competitor who had become her business partner in one of the most unexpected developments of both their careers. The investors had been intrigued enough by Sarah's collaboration proposal to arrange a meeting between the two women. Elena had initially been skeptical, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate competitive strategy, but when Sarah explained her experience in Elena's hometown and her genuine change of perspective, Elena agreed to explore the possibility. Their first meeting had been awkward, with both women careful and professional. But as they discussed their different approaches to business and their shared goals for the project, they discovered that collaboration might actually work better than competition. Elena's community focus and Sarah's resources could complement each other in ways that would benefit everyone involved. "I still cannot believe you figured out who I was just from visiting here," Elena said, looking around the restaurant where she had worked as a teenager. "This place means so much to me, but I never thought it would play a role in my business life." Sarah smiled, remembering her initial reaction to the shabby restaurant and her complete dismissal of its importance. "I almost left that first night. I was so focused on my own problems that I nearly missed everything this place had to teach me." Betty approached their table with obvious delight at seeing Elena again, and with genuine warmth towards Sarah, who had become something of a regular customer over the past few weeks. The partnership had required several meetings to work out the details, and Sarah had found herself returning to the small town repeatedly, drawn by its peaceful atmosphere and the relationships she was building there. "It is so nice to see you, two girls working together instead of fighting," Betty said as she refilled their coffee cups. "Elena, Sarah here has been telling everyone about your smart business ideas. She is very proud of you." Elena looked surprised and touched by this information. In the competitive business world, rivals rarely praised each other, even after successful collaborations were established. Sarah's genuine admiration for Elena's vision and character had been one of the factors that convinced Elena the partnership could work. The investors made their final decision yesterday, Sarah told Elena over dinner. The collaborative approach won the contract. They were impressed that we could find a way to combine competitive advantages rather than just canceling each other out. Elena grinned, clearly pleased but not entirely surprised. "I think they liked the idea of getting two companies for the price of one, plus the community impact angle they had not considered before. The contract would indeed change both their businesses significantly. Elena's company would handle community, engagement, and small-town market development across a network of rural locations, while Sarah's firm provided technical support and urban market connections. The model could be scaled to other projects, potentially creating a new approach to business development that balanced profit with social responsibility. But the professional success was only part of what had changed for Sarah over the past month. Her forced stay in the small town had made her reconsider not just her business strategies, but her entire approach to life and relationships. "I have been thinking about opening a satellite office here," Sarah mentioned casually, watching for Elena's reaction. "Not for the business partnership, but for myself. I could work remotely part of the time, maybe get involved in some of the community projects you are always talking about." Elena raised an eyebrow. "The city executive wants to become a small-town volunteer? That seems like a pretty big change." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the dramatic shift in her priorities. "It is a big change, but I spent so many years climbing the corporate ladder that I forgot to ask where it was actually leading me. Being here, seeing how you maintained connections to this place while building your career, made me realize I want something different." The conversation was interrupted by Margaret Henderson, the librarian, who stopped by their table with obvious curiosity about seeing the two businesswomen together. Sarah had gotten to know Margaret during her recent visits, and the older woman had become something of a mentor, sharing stories about the town's history and the importance of community connections. "I hope you are not planning to change our little restaurant," Margaret said with mock sternness. "Some things are perfect just the way they are." Elena laughed. "Actually, we were thinking about sponsoring some improvements. New equipment for the kitchen, maybe some renovations that would help Betty serve more customers without losing the atmosphere that makes this place special." This had been one of their first collaborative ideas, using some of their contract success to give back to the community that had brought them together. Betty had been resistant at first, not wanting charity, but Elena had convinced her that successful partnerships were about mutual benefit, not one-way giving. As the evening continued, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that night when her car broke down. She had gained a business partner, discovered a new approach to success, and found a community that valued relationships over achievements. "There is something I need to tell you," Sarah said to Elena as they prepared to leave. "Something I learned about myself during all this that you should probably know if we are going to be partners." Elena waited, wondering what revelation might be coming. "I grew up about 50 miles from here," Sarah continued, "in a town very similar to this one. I worked in restaurants and saved money for college just like you did. But when I left, I never looked back. I was so determined to escape my background that I forgot it was actually part of my strength." Elena studied her partner's face, understanding the significance of this admission. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to know that my change of heart was not just about business strategy. It was about remembering who I used to be before I decided that success meant leaving everything behind. Watching how you maintained your connections while building your career showed me that I had made a false choice." As they said goodbye to Betty and walked out into the quiet evening, both women understood that their partnership represented more than just a business arrangement. It was a combination of different approaches to success, different relationships with community, and different understandings of what achievements actually meant. Sarah's car had been repaired weeks ago, but she had kept returning to this small town, drawn by the relationships and the sense of purpose she had discovered here. Now, with the business partnership formalized and plans underway for community investment projects, she realized she had found something she had not even known she was looking for. "You know what is funny?" Elena said as they reached their cars. "I used to dream about impressing big city executives with my success. I never imagined that one of them would end up wanting to learn from my hometown instead of the other way around." Sarah smiled, remembering her initial dismissive attitude toward the restaurant and its customers. "I thought success meant rising above places like this. It took getting stranded here to realize that real success might mean finding ways to lift places like this up instead." As Sarah drove back to the city that night, she was already making plans for her return. The satellite office was not just a nice idea, it was going to become reality. She had discovered that the most important business Lesson of her career had nothing to do with profit margins or market strategies. It was about understanding that success without community, achievement without relationship, and winning without meaning were ultimately hollow victories. The small town that had seemed like an obstacle to her plans had become the foundation for a completely new vision of what her life and career could be. And it had all started with a simple decision to give Anyhow Restaurant a chance, never knowing that the unassuming place would change everything she thought she knew about herself and what really mattered.